The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world has paused. In the suburbs of Northern California, people locked their doors, pulled their curtains shut, and prayed the shadow of fear wouldn't come knocking. But somewhere someone was writing, pen scratching against paper, each symbol carefully drawn. Circles, triangles, strange markings that made no sense to anyone but him. And at the top of the letter, a chilling declaration. This is the Zodiac speaking. It wasn't just a name. It was a mask, a title, a new identity that the killer gave himself. He wasn't satisfied with just taking lives. He wanted to be remembered, wanted to be feared. And so, he sent his words out into the world like poisoned arrows, straight into the heart of California. The newspapers received the letters first. At first glance, they looked like nonsense. Pages filled with cryptic codes, secret messages hidden inside a jungle of symbols. But the meaning was clear. Print my words or more people will die. For the people of California, it felt like a horror story had stepped off the page and into real life. This wasn't just a murderer in the shadows. This was a man who wanted everyone to know his name, who wanted his words to echo louder than his crimes. An echo they did. Each letter brought new fear, each symbol a mystery that no one could solve. The police were desperate, the public was terrified, and the killer, well, he was playing a game. A cruel, merciless game where the prize was control. The Zodiac Killer didn't just strike with a weapon. His deadliest tool was his pen. He turned language into a weapon, puzzles into taunts, and fear into his signature. And the most haunting part. Decades later, some of his secrets remain hidden in plain sight. His ciphers, codes that promise to reveal his identity, still mock investigators and puzzle solvers to this day. Who was he? Why did he kill? And what secrets still hide inside those unsolved codes? This is not just the story of a killer. This is the story of a riddle, one that has haunted America for more than 50 years. So let's go back. Back to the beginning when the name Zodiac first slipped out of the shadows and into the headlines. It began quietly. No one in California could have imagined that a shadow was about to crawl over their towns, leaving behind a trail of fear that would last for decades. The first whispers of the Zodiac appeared not with a name, but with a crime. On a warm night in December 1968, two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were out for a simple date in Vallejo, California. They had no idea they were stepping into the pages of history. The night was ordinary. A quiet stretch of road, the stars above, the kind of evening that should have ended with nothing more than laughter and soft conversation. But somewhere nearby, someone was watching. Someone who had chosen them not for who they were but simply because they were there. Moments later, the silence of the night was broken. When the police arrived, the scene was chilling. Two young lives cut short for no clear reason. There was no robbery, no sign of a personal grudge. Just senseless violence. The case stunned the local community, but for the police, it was just another mystery without answers. No one could know that this was only the beginning. Fast forward to July 4, 1969. Fireworks lit up the sky, families gathered to celebrate America's independence, but on a dark stretch near Blue Rock Springs Park, another couple sat quietly in their car. Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. What happened next would send shockwaves across Northern California. Out of the shadows, a car pulled up. At first, it didn't seem threatening. Maybe another couple stopping to talk, maybe someone just passing by. But then the man approached, holding something that glittered in the dim light. Before anyone could react, shots rang out. This time, though, one of the victims survived. Mike Mageau, badly wounded, managed to describe the attacker. He spoke of a man, unknown, shadowy but very real. The killer wasn't a ghost. He was flesh and blood. And just hours later, the police received a call. A calm, chilling voice confessed to the crime. The caller gave details only the killer could have known. Then, as if it were nothing, he hung up. The fear that had begun the year before was no longer an isolated tragedy. It was now a pattern. Someone was hunting in Northern California. Someone who didn't just kill but wanted to make sure everyone knew it. But the real terror was still to come. Weeks later, newspapers across the Bay Area received letters. Plain envelopes, simple handwriting. Inside, long pages of coded messages. Strange symbols that looked like they belonged in a puzzle book, not in a police investigation. And at the top of those letters was a line that would become infamous. "This is the Zodiac speaking." It was his introduction to the world. The killer wasn't content with being silent anymore. He had a name now, one he had given himself. And he wanted everyone to hear it. He demanded that his letters be published on the front page of newspapers. If not, he threatened more lives would be taken. The editors faced a nightmare decision: feed his ego or risk innocent blood. Many newspapers gave in, choosing to print his words in hopes of saving lives. And thus the game began. The Zodiac had revealed himself not only as a killer but as a man obsessed with control. He didn't just want to take lives. He wanted to own the headlines, the fear, and the attention of an entire state. And his favorite weapon wasn't his gun. It was his words. Because hidden inside those letters were codes, mysterious ciphers filled with strange markings, promises of his identity, secrets waiting to be unlocked. But could they ever be solved? The first time the letters arrived, they didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. Plain envelopes, no special markings, just everyday paper. But inside they carried something far more dangerous than a weapon. 3 different newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, each received a letter. Inside was a block of strange writing, hundreds of characters, symbols, circles with crosses through them, and odd shapes that seemed almost childlike. But this was no child's game. At the top of each letter, a demand: publish this code or more people will die. The newspapers hesitated. They knew the risks. But fear has a way of forcing decisions, and soon the strange messages were in print for the whole world to see. Readers woke up, grabbed their morning paper, and instead of headlines about politics or sports, they found themselves staring into the mind of a killer who wanted to be heard. The code became known as the 408 cipher, because it contained 408 characters. To most it looked like nonsense. But to one schoolteacher and his wife, it was a challenge too tempting to resist. Donald and Betty Harden sat at their kitchen table, newspaper spread out, pencils in hand. Hour after hour they worked, replacing symbols with letters, searching for patterns. And slowly, the message began to reveal itself. The Zodiac's words were chilling. He wrote about the thrill of killing, about how it gave him power, about how his victims would become his slaves in the afterlife. But the one thing everyone wanted, the killer's name, was missing. He had promised to reveal his identity inside the code. Instead, he gave the world more questions than answers. The 408 cipher had been solved, but the mystery remained. Who was the Zodiac? And then came another letter. This time there was no solution. No quick breakthrough. The 340 cipher, as it became known, was far more complex. Pages of symbols arranged in a chaotic grid, a puzzle that seemed to mock anyone who dared to solve it. For decades, it remained unsolved. Professional cryptographers tried and failed. The FBI pored over it. Codebreakers who had cracked wartime ciphers gave it their best effort. Nothing worked. It wasn't until 51 years later in 2020 that a team of 3 codebreakers, an American, an Australian, and a Belgian, finally cracked the 340 cipher. The solution revealed another taunt. The Zodiac bragged that the police would never catch him, laughed at those who hunted him, and once again, refused to give his name. The message was clear. He was playing a game and he was winning. But not all of his codes have been solved. Several smaller ciphers, including one known as the 13-character cipher, remain a mystery. 13 symbols that the Zodiac claimed would reveal his identity. 13 symbols that, to this day, no one has been able to decode. There's also the 32-symbol cipher, another puzzle that some believe was a map, pointing to a hidden location. But like the others, it never gave investigators what they wanted most: his name. Was it possible the Zodiac was lying all along? That his codes were never meant to be solved? That the promise of his identity being hidden in them was just another cruel trick to keep the world guessing? Many experts believe so. After all, his goal wasn't to confess. It was to control. To keep people busy, to keep his legend alive, to make sure his name echoed long after his crimes ended. And in that he succeeded. The power of the Zodiac wasn't just in what he did. It was in the way he made people feel. Every time a letter appeared, the newspapers sold out. Every time a new code was published, amateur sleuths and experts alike stayed awake into the night, trying to unlock the killer's mind. It wasn't just about murder anymore. It was about obsession, about fear, about mystery. The Zodiac had turned the entire state of California into players in his twisted game. And the prize wasn't catching him. The prize was his attention. Even today, over 50 years later, his codes are studied in classrooms, in online forums, in secret corners of the internet where puzzle lovers and true crime enthusiasts gather. His handwriting, his symbols, his strange, almost childlike drawings, they are all part of a riddle that may never be completely solved. And perhaps that was his plan all along. To live forever, not through his name but through his mystery. Because as long as those codes remain unsolved, the Zodiac Killer is still out there. In words, in symbols, in the minds of everyone who tries to decode the undecodable. For decades, one question has burned brighter than all the others. Who was the Zodiac Killer? The crimes were terrifying, the codes were maddening, but it was the mystery of the man himself that consumed investigators and the public alike. Each letter, each phone call, each mocking taunt only deepened the obsession. And soon faces began to emerge. Men who could have been Zodiac, men who fit pieces of the puzzle, though never quite all of them. Magnifying glass tilted right. Arthur Lee Allen. The first and most infamous suspect was a man named Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was a schoolteacher, known by those around him as strange, unsettling, even intimidating. He was intelligent, but he carried a dark aura that made people uneasy. When police searched his home, they found disturbing items: weapons, tapes about hunting humans, and cryptic writings. He owned a watch with the very same crosshair symbol the Zodiac used in his letters. The brand name of that watch: Zodiac. The coincidences piled up. Handwriting experts compared Allen's scrawl to the killer's letters. Some saw similarities, others dismissed them. His friends whispered about odd comments he made, strange obsessions he carried. And yet, despite years of suspicion, Allen was never charged. DNA tests didn't match. His fingerprints didn't fit. The case against him was strong in rumor but weak in evidence. When he died in 1992, many believed the truth had been buried with him. But others still insist. Allen was Zodiac. Magnifying glass tilted right. Richard Gaikowski. Then there was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist and filmmaker. He lived in San Francisco during the murders, moved in counterculture circles, and had the intelligence to craft elaborate ciphers. His voice, according to some who remembered the killer's phone calls, sounded eerily similar. Gaikowski's connection came years later, mostly through amateur sleuths who combed through his writings and movements. He was never officially charged, but his name remains forever tied to the shadows of suspicion. Magnifying glass tilted right. Lawrence Kane. Another name whispered in the Zodiac's legend is Lawrence Kane. Kane was a man with a troubled past, known for his brushes with the law and his odd behavior. Witnesses from some of the crime scenes claimed that Kane resembled the composite sketch of Zodiac. He also lived near several victims, and his background in cryptography made him a compelling possibility. But again, the evidence was circumstantial. Enough to keep him in the conversation, never enough to close the case. Magnifying glass tilted right. Earl Van Best Jr. In more recent years, new theories have emerged. One of the most controversial centered on Earl Van Best Jr., a man accused by his own son of being the Zodiac Killer. Gary Stewart, in his book The Most Dangerous Animal of All, laid out his case. photographs, handwriting comparisons, and personal history that seemed to line up with the Zodiac's timeline. He claimed his father's name even appeared hidden inside the Zodiac ciphers. The story was explosive, but experts pushed back. Many dismissed it as coincidence, as the desperate search of a son trying to make sense of a dark past. Still, the name of Earl Van Best Jr. became part of the Zodiac's myth. Magnifying glass tilted right countless others. And the list goes on. Dozens of suspects over the years, from ex-soldiers to quiet neighbors, from local eccentrics to shadowy figures who vanished without a trace. Each new theory felt like it might finally unmask the killer. Each new lead dissolved into frustration. The truth is, the Zodiac was careful. He knew how to play with police, how to manipulate the public, how to vanish just enough to keep his identity secure. He was either a genius at deception, or simply lucky. The unsolved identity. The most haunting part of the Zodiac case isn't just what he did, it's that we still don't know who he was. He could have been Arthur Lee Allen, the strange teacher with the Zodiac watch. He could have been Richard Gaikowski, the radical journalist with a mind for puzzles. He could have been Lawrence Kane, lurking in plain sight, living near his victims. He could have been someone else entirely, a man whose name has never been spoken, whose face has never been tied to the crimes. Every suspect brings us closer, yet every suspect keeps us guessing. And maybe that was exactly what the Zodiac wanted. For all the letters, all the codes, all the taunts, one truth remains. The mask has never been lifted. The man who called himself Zodiac has remained hidden in the shadows. His identity one of America's most enduring mysteries. And perhaps that was his greatest victory. Not the crimes themselves, but the fact that half a century later, we are still asking the same question. Who was the Zodiac Killer? In the late 1960s and early 70s, families in Northern California lived with the constant hum of fear. Parents warned their children to be home before dark. Couples thought twice before parking on quiet backroads. Even the sound of a ringing phone carried unease. Could it be him again? But fear alone wasn't what made the Zodiac unforgettable. It was his need for attention. By writing letters to newspapers, by daring the police to stop him, he made himself part of everyday life. His words were read in the morning over coffee, debated in offices, whispered about in classrooms. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a presence, woven into the fabric of California life. And even when the killings stopped, the memory of his words lingered. Movie camera Zodiac in movies and media. The story of the Zodiac has been told and retold across generations. Movies, documentaries, podcasts, and books have all tried to capture the enigma of the man behind the ciphers. Hollywood couldn't resist the tale. From gritty crime dramas to blockbuster films like Zodiac 2007, directors have tried to bring his mystery to life. Each adaptation adds to his legend, fueling both fascination and fear. Television shows, crime channels, even late-night talk shows have referenced him. The crosshair symbol he drew, the simple circle with intersecting lines, has become one of the most chilling icons in criminal history. In a strange way, the Zodiac got exactly what he wanted: immortality. Laptop computer, the internet age. When the internet arrived, it gave the Zodiac a second life. Suddenly, his letters and codes weren't just locked away in police files. They were online, available to anyone with curiosity and time. Online communities began forming. Thousands of amateur sleuths spent sleepless nights poring over scans of his ciphers, swapping theories, analyzing handwriting, comparing suspects. Forums lit up with debates. Was it Arthur Lee Allen? Was it someone else? Could the codes hide his real name? Every few years, a new breakthrough would make headlines. A supposed new suspect, a claimed code solution, a DNA link. Each time, hope would surge that the case was finally solved. And each time the mystery remained. But the internet did give one real victory. In 2020, when the 340 cipher was finally cracked after 51 years, it wasn't law enforcement who solved it. It was a small team of amateur codebreakers from around the world, working together online. A teacher, a software developer, and a mathematician, people the Zodiac could never have imagined, finally unlocked one of his puzzles. And in that moment, it was as if the world had struck back, if only for a second. Books, a lasting obsession. Today, more than 50 years later, the Zodiac remains a constant subject of fascination. His crimes have shaped true crime as a genre. His codes are still studied in classrooms, in books on cryptography, and in puzzles crafted for mystery enthusiasts. Why? Because the Zodiac represents something deeper than just crime. He is the embodiment of the unknown. The faceless figure who wrote in symbols, who gave us just enough to question, but never enough to answer. People are drawn to mysteries that resist solutions. And the Zodiac, with his unsolved ciphers and hidden identity, may be the greatest mystery of all. Mantelpiece clock, immortality through mystery. The Zodiac once wrote that killing gave him power. But in truth, it wasn't the violence that gave him immortality. It was the mystery. The unanswered codes. The suspects who never quite fit. The shadow of a name we'll never know. As the years pass, the crimes fade, but the legend only grows stronger. The Zodiac is no longer just a man. He is an idea, a ghost, a story that refuses to end. And maybe that's the most chilling part. Because as long as the codes remain unsolved, as long as we don't have a name, the Zodiac Killer is still out there. Not in the flesh, but in the minds of everyone who dares to chase his riddle. The Zodiac once promised that his identity was hidden in his codes. He dared the world to find him, teased investigators with every strange symbol, every cryptic phrase. And yet, all these years later, the question still hangs in the air. Who was he? We may never know. The case remains open, dusty files sitting in evidence rooms, waiting for a piece of proof that may never come. Detectives have retired, suspects have died, and still the shadow of Zodiac lingers. Each time a new lead surfaces, hope flickers and then fades again. Perhaps the truth is already out there, buried inside one of his ciphers, overlooked in an old report, waiting for fresh eyes to discover it. Or perhaps the Zodiac was smarter than anyone ever gave him credit for, careful enough to erase his trail, leaving behind only fear and puzzles. What makes the Zodiac so haunting isn't just what he did. It's the silence he left behind. Most killers are eventually caught, their names known, their stories told. But Zodiac slipped away. He became a ghost. And in that ghostliness he won. Because even now, more than 50 years later, we are still speaking his name. Still turning over his codes. Still asking questions that have no answers. The man who signed his letters with a crosshair symbol wanted to live forever in mystery. And in a chilling way, he did. So tonight, as you think back on the strange symbols, the unsolved puzzles, the suspects who came and went, ask yourself, was Zodiac a genius, carefully orchestrating the greatest mystery in American crime? Or was he simply a man, lucky enough to slip through the cracks of time? We may never truly know. But one thing is certain, the story of the Zodiac Killer is not just a tale of murder. It is a riddle, a haunting echo, a puzzle carved into history. Puzzle that refuses to die. And maybe that's the scariest part of all.